Again, in this sacred time and in this sacred place, let us be together. Let us feel the oneness that we are as we spend some time in quiet. So breathe with me. Feel the solidness of the pew or the ground under your feet as you breathe. Breathing in, filling your lungs, and then breathing out. Thinking of nothing other than breath, than life. Breathe in and breathe out. Once more. Notice nothing more than your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Hosanna, we say, on this Palm Sunday in celebration of the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem. Palm branches strewn in his way. But I have to think that Jesus didn't think of himself as a conquering hero, but as one who would serve. Serve the divine in him, and all with whom he came in contact. Did you notice that service is a key part of both our mission and our vision statement? So this morning in the quiet, I'd like you to turn to the divine that you are within. Look inside. If you would, breathe in and out of that core of your being. And answer this question. How is it that I should live? How is it that I should serve? Let the thoughts come to you as they may, or just the sense of great goodness, power, and faith. What is mine to do? How am I to serve? Contemplate that in the silence. And then as you're ready, bring back some of that revelation, some of that inspiration that you found in the silence. And come back to this time and this place. We are grateful for the purpose with which we inhabit this earth, we live in our families and our communities, and so it is. Amen. So the topic that I chose for today was Sacred Me, Sacred You. We've already talked a little bit about sacredness. Are you comfortable with saying, I'm sacred? I see a couple hands. That's good. Thank you, by the way, for those of you that were moved to take that card home. view it throughout the week and say it, I am enough. And part of that is part of the sacredness of all. One of the timeless questions that men and women ask is, why? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? We'll talk about that this morning, and we've actually given different language to that somewhat. What is mine to do? And we don't want to stray from that sense of being enough, that sense of perfection that is our being. So we don't want to lose that, but we do want to turn, as it's said in the fifth principle that we use here at Unity. It's not enough to know the truth, but then you must live that out in very active and specific and intentional ways. So if you weren't here last week, let me catch you up just a little bit, because we talked about the fact that, and here was the phrase, as a unique and perfect expression of the divine, I, Neil Worthington, am enough. And like I said, you probably said that phrase many times over the week. And we talked about the fact that we have in our heritage power, we have presence, we have knowing, we have goodness. All of that is inherent in our heritage as we live out that. It's there. It's ours to claim. And we live it out in the perfection of sacredness that we are. I hope that has impacted you as you've kept that in your mind, that phrase that we put together last week. I remember as a child scripture, as a man think, of course it was man because it was the King James Version, but as a man or woman thinketh in his heart, so is he or she. And as we hold those thoughts of truth, those things that really resonate with us, and we say, this is true, hold them there. Don't let other things intrude and take them away from you. Hold those things in your heart, and so it is. And I hope that's been your experience. Today I want to talk about the theme of being enough in a different way. Sacred me, sacred you. And let's begin with sacred me. And I'll get the clicker, and we'll move. Well, I'll tell you, Tom, and you click. Oh, there we go. Doesn't seem to be working. By the way, we didn't last long enough on the gratitudes for me to say how grateful I am for some regular members of this congregation that serve in unique ways. John is not here and Deb is not here. We missed them. So we've been scrambling a little bit this morning, and we may scramble a little bit. Bear with us. Sacred me. And I'd like to make the definition. Tom, you've got it there for me. You are a sacred being, holy, blessed, dedicated, set apart, special, after the nature of the divine. Are you okay with saying I'm holy? I'm blessed? How about I'm set apart? I'm special after the nature of the divine. We'll get comfortable with it. It'll be important. Remember the story of creation. You remember? Very first, we talked about night and day being created. It's one of the stories of creation. There are two of them in the book of Genesis, and they vary a little bit. Night and day. And after night and day came into being, the divine said, it is good. Right, you got it. And then it was the sky and sea. And the divine said that it's good. And then the land and the vegetation, as things begin to be fuller and fuller as we know them now. And it's good. And then there were the fish and the birds. And the divine proclaimed, probably didn't use words, but proclaimed that it's good. And then there were animals and us, people. and the divine proclaimed in that crowning, as from our point of view anyway, that crowning bit of creation, that it's good. It's very good. It's all good. There's no way in which it is not good. So that creation in the creation story happened long before there were ever altars or churches or sacred objects. That was the very nature of things from the beginning, in the mind of the divine, if you will, even. That all is holy. All is whole. All is designed to be whole. All is perfect. All is sacred. So we don't have to wait for the expressions of sacred things, sacred places. We are sacred at the very start of it. That extends not only to things like kneeling in prayer, singing hymns. By the way, it's Phyllis, thank you. You're down there for the moment. We actually had a hymnal, our Wings of Songs hymnal we sang from this morning. And that's a sacred act. But it's not limited to that. It's not limited to any of the other things that you might think and call sacred. So, what is it limited to? Not only did we, that crowning, as we, again, from our perspective, that crowning bit of creation, inherit that sacred sense, and not only do we have respect for ourselves, we have respect for all of the creation, because the imprint of the divine is not limited to us as humans. It's inherent in all of creation. Remember, you probably heard of sacred animals. Sacred, what was it? I heard it. Cow. We use that term otherwise, but in fact, in other religious traditions, the Hindu tradition, the cow in particular is sacred. But some carry it even further, enough to wear a mask so that a bug doesn't go into their mouth and be killed in the process. That respect for life extends thoroughly. So it's there. That's just the nature of things. The sacredness of things is therefore. And sacred me, I am sacred. I am holy. We are in the image and likeness of the divine. So let us turn from the sacred me, which we really started with last week, and let's move on to the next one, sacred you. Thanks, Tom. The same image and likeness of the divine that is in me is in you. Well, this is a great leveler. It's awfully easy for me to judge somebody as being a little bit less than I am. But they're not. Divine didn't have preference for you over someone else. That other, whether they're of different race, different creed, different religion, different ability, different age, different look. The divine created each in the image of the divine. And so that other that we look at, sacred you, deserves the same reverence, the same respect that a Hindu might give to a cow or to another person. That reverence for life, reverence for the perfection of creation. So what do we do when we're looking at the other? Let's call it the other. That's kind of a generic term, but I'm going to use this. So there's another, and we're looking at them and their sacredness. How do we look at that? I want to turn to a couple of scriptures from the New Testament. Tom, let's look at this one. By the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of themselves more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith given to all. So the measure of faith, the measure of life, the measure of dignity, the measure of honor is given to all. And so it's inherent on us not to think of ourselves more highly than we would think of the sacred other. And also, Tom, the next one from Ephesians, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ has forgiven you. So, if you stop to evaluate your actions, are they kind? Are they tender-hearted? Are they forgiving? When maybe there really isn't anything to forgive. But does that compassion flow forth from you? Because that the other one, the person you see is, in fact, sacred. I want us to go one step further. I want us to talk about sacred service. This isn't in the title. It kind of came along afterwards. It's things that's been coming to me, and it probably started because we began to speak about spiritual gifts here in the class Donna's teaching. And then in my class at Unity, we talked about it much, much further in terms of development of staff and volunteers in the church. I'm kind of learning about that. It's a really intensive class. I'm learning a lot. So we talk not in terms of volunteers so much as we talk in terms of sacred service. So we have sacred me, sacred you, and sacred service. This is a part of carrying that extension of the fifth principle, putting into action what it is that is the truth that we claim, that we believe. I want to tell you a little bit of history. Anybody know Nicholas Herman? No. I bet you do. You just don't know him by that name. Some of you. Nicholas Herman was born at the time of the 30 Years' War in Europe, 1618 to 1648. It was a horrific war. He was born in poverty to parents that had little or nothing. And in order to just survive, he enlisted in the army. He did that, and he got a little stipend, and he got food to eat, because otherwise he might not have had any. And it's that time that he spent in the army that was very significant, because he came on some spiritual experiences that lasted him to the end of his life and developed him as a person in terms of sacred service, and we'll get to that. So he at one time was captured and was going to be hung for treason, but he exhibited no fear, and he said, I'm not who you think I am. And that came through so purely and truly that he was released. Later in that war, he was injured and was lame until the end of his life. And being lame, he could no longer serve and became engaged as a footman for a wealthy individual. He describes himself as being horrifically awkward, always dropping and breaking things. I can identify with that. And so he wasn't the perfect match for the job. And eventually, he either lost or left the job and decided to live as a hermit. And that led him to becoming part of a Carmelite order in Paris. when he entered the order, he took the name Lawrence of the Resurrection. Anybody know yet? So it was that Brother Lawrence began what was the most important thing in his life. He had had a religious upbringing, he returned to that ever more deeply and expressed it in this way. In that he was a layperson in the order, but in that order he took on the job of kitchen work. And he washed pots and pans, and eventually he cooked until his leg allowed him not to do any anymore, and then he became a simple sandal maker. So he served the order by making sandals for the rest of the brothers. Brother Lawrence began to be esteemed as one of the wise people of the community, and some very high ups would come to him for counsel. And he began to write letters, began to put down some of his thoughts. And those books were collected into the Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. And he found in that service, menial though it was, a way to practice the presence. Now we talk about presence here. We say it every week as we talk about presence in our closing statement, prayer for protection. But presence doesn't necessarily mean that we are engaged in the highest of positions. Doesn't mean that we're esteemed by everyone else. It may simply mean that we may serve. We may offer sacred service. Now, in that spiritual gifts class that is running right now, and if you didn't get in on it, you're missing something. We talk about understanding the passions, understanding the gifts that we're given, understanding the abilities that are ours in a unique way that can be offered in service to the spiritual community, to the community at large, to the world. But in addition to that, every task, whatever it is that you're given to do, is an opportunity for service. So I'd like you to do this week. I'm going to give you another little assignment. We think of sacred objects often, and I would like you at the beginning of the week sometime to just wander and find something that symbolizes the sacred for you. I don't care what it is. Probably ought not to be too big, because you might want to carry it around with you or put it in a place where you can notice it a lot. An object that is a symbol of the sacred for you. You'll know what it is. You'll see it and it'll just say, this is it. So I'd like you to choose that item, that sacred symbol, and then take that sacred symbol and either carry it with you or put it in a place where you can't miss it, where it's in front of you all the time. And remember that you are sacred, that everyone you meet and engage is sacred, that all is sacred, and that sacred service is the way to express the divine in this world, in your situation. And then I want you to do this. I want you to bring that sacred symbol, and I'm going to make an altar outside of the church, outside the front door here, next Sunday. And as you come in, I'd like you to add that sacred symbol to the altar. Bring that to community, because in that expressing your sacredness or identifying your sacredness, you bring that to community in service to the community. So we'll make that altar. You can have your sacred symbol back We'll disassemble it at some point. But I would like you to bring that, and I would like us to have outside the door an altar of sacred symbols that lead us to sacred service, that remind